The water is 4 feet deep on Canal Street. Something enormous is moving through it. No civilian truck, no fire engine, no standard emergency vehicle would dare try. What rolled through New Orleans in September 2005 ran on diesel and weighed 14 tons. 70% of New Orleans sits below sea level. Yet when the levees broke, the city didn't flood. It filled, like a bowl left under a faucet. Only a machine rated to ford 5 feet of standing water could navigate what came next. The Oshkosh MTVR was built for war zones. In 2005, as it found 8 miles from the French Quarter, in a city that had become an inland sea. The truck's resume was combat. Its next mission was rescue. Hurricane Katrina formed in the Bahamas on August 23, 2005. Within 4 days, it had grown into a Category 5 storm over the Gulf of Mexico, sustaining winds near 175 miles per hour, and the Gulf fed it everything it needed. On August 28th, New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin issued the city's first ever mandatory evacuation order. Approximately 80% of the greater metropolitan area's 1.3 million residents fled. Around 100,000 did not, or could not. Katrina weakened before landfall, dropping to a Category 3 storm. It struck near Buras, Louisiana, on the morning of August 29, 2005. The wind caused serious damage. What the wind set in motion was worse. At 6:30 a.m. on August 29th, the 17th Street Canal floodwall began to fail. A full breach opened by 9 a.m., and water from Lake Pontchartrain poured through the gap and into the city's main basin with nothing to stop it. More than 50 separate breaches eventually tore through the levee system surrounding New Orleans. Water depths in the hardest hit sections reached 20 feet. 80% of the city went under. It stayed that way for weeks. Your roads became rivers. No fire truck, no ambulance, no police cruiser could operate in water that deep. Standard emergency vehicles topped out at a few inches of water clearance. The rescue effort needed something designed for terrain, not pavement. As the Oshkosh MTVR, Medium Tactical Vehicle Replacement, had been in U.S. Marine Corps service since July 2001. It was designed to replace the aging M809 and M939 series 5-ton trucks, and to go where they never could. The MTVR runs a Caterpillar C12 turbocharged diesel, 11.9 liters, 425 horsepower. Power feeds through an Allison 7-speed automatic transmission to all 6 wheels simultaneously. The engine idles at 1,800 revolutions per minute. Everything about it is built for load and terrain. The TAK4 independent suspension gives each front wheel 16 inches of vertical travel. That fording depth is rated at 60 inches, exactly 5 feet of standing water, without any modification kit. That number was written for Pacific jungles. New Orleans claimed it. If you want to see how these trucks drove through a drowned American city and brought people back from the edge, now here's what I ask. See that subscribe button? It's our exchange. Your way of saying this reached you. Hit subscribe if this resonated, drop a like if it moved you, and tell us in the comments what you know about Katrina. It helps us share more stories like this. Back to the MTVR. On September 2, 2005, Marine Service Support Group 24 arrived in the New Orleans area, deploying from the USS Shreveport and USS Whidbey Island. More than 250 Marines came ashore. They brought equipment. The MTVR was the centerpiece of it. G23 standard cargo variant and MK25 with winch were the primary trucks deployed. These were the same machines already accumulating combat miles in Iraq and Afghanistan. New Orleans would test them on different terms entirely. The streets were not simply flooded. They were layered with raw sewage, petroleum runoff, and industrial toxins and debris from every structure the surge had dismantled. The Navy described the floodwater in a single phrase: toxic soup. MTV. Our drivers navigated by map and compass. Street signs had vanished below the waterline. Landmarks were submerged. The surface under their wheels was invisible, and drivers measured depth by watching their bow wave and feeling resistance through the steering column. The Dana electronic central tire inflation system allowed drivers to adjust tire pressure from inside the cab while moving. Lowering pressure spread the footprint across submerged asphalt and improved grip where traction was entirely a matter of faith. The cargo beds were loaded at staging areas near Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport. Each MK23 could carry up to 15 tons on paved surface, enough capacity for thousands of liters of bottled water, medical kits, and MRE rations. Convoy routes came from Joint Task Force Katrina Command and headquartered in the region under Army General Russell Honore. Routes that appeared passable on paper regularly proved otherwise once an MTVR's front axle dropped into a submerged debris field. The lower Ninth Ward suffered catastrophic inundation. Floodwaters had lifted entire houses off their foundations and deposited them in the middle of streets. TVR convoys had to push through passages no other wheeled vehicle could attempt. Survivors had been stranded for days without power, water, or communication. Some had taken refuge on rooftops, others were in attics. When an MTVR rolled through their street, as it was the first ground vehicle they had seen since Monday morning, loading survivors onto cargo beds required careful coordination. The trucks rode high off the ground. Elderly residents, injured civilians, and mothers carrying infants had to be physically lifted by Marines standing waist-deep in floodwater to reach the beds. The TAK-4 suspension absorbed what the surface concealed: submerged curbs, half-buried cars, collapsed storm drains. Each wheel moved independently, as keeping all 6 tires in contact with a road the driver could neither see nor predict. The Louisiana Superdome had sheltered approximately 26,000 people through the storm. By September 2nd, conditions inside had deteriorated severely. No power, no sanitation, extreme heat. TVR convoys carrying supplies and relief personnel began routing toward the stadium. The streets surrounding the Superdome were blocked by abandoned vehicles, fallen signage, and standing water. Convoy commanders dismounted and walked ahead of their trucks on foot, checking depth, checking clearance, before giving the forward signal. Convoy operations ran day and night without pause. Truck headlights cut through flood haze over black water. Diesel exhaust mixed with the chemical smell of the contamination. Drivers ran back-to-back shifts in temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, General Russell Honore pressed hard for ground logistics reach into the hardest-hit neighborhoods. The MTVR gave him that reach. It could go where helicopters couldn't land and where boats couldn't load cargo or evacuate at scale. Navy Seabees operating alongside the Marines fielded MTVRs during debris clearance and infrastructure recovery, and they used the trucks to drag wreckage from blocked roads, deliver generator fuel, and transport decontamination equipment into contaminated zones. The Caterpillar C-12 ran reliably through sustained heat and chemical exposure. Water intrusion into air filtration was the constant operational threat during deep fording. Yes, mechanics inspected air intake systems at every scheduled rest stop along convoy routes. The MTVR's all-aluminum cab performed well in conditions that would have corroded a steel structure within days. Constant salt water and sewage exposure, the kind of environment that destroys conventional trucks from the inside out, barely touched it. MK23 carried 78 gallons of fuel and had a cruising range of approximately 300 miles on open road. In flooded New Orleans streets, the resistance of water against 6 tires ate through that range faster than any desert or mountain route ever had. By early September, the city's convention center had also become a crisis point, as thousands of civilians gathered there with no supplies and no communication. Ground convoys were the only practical option for bulk delivery into the area. The floodwater itself was a physical hazard to personnel aboard the trucks. Medical teams warned of contamination from petrochemicals, bacteria, and industrial runoff. Marines in cargo beds kept wounds covered and avoided direct exposure to standing water. As days passed, pumping operations slowly reduced water levels in some sections. Streets impassable in Week 1 opened, and MTVR convoys pushed deeper into affected neighborhoods that had been entirely cut off since the levees failed. Recovery operations extended into St. Bernard Parish, immediately east of New Orleans, where 95% of the parish had flooded. And MTVR trucks carried search teams and recovery equipment into areas still accessible only by high-clearance vehicle or boat. In the lower 9th Ward, peak flood depths had exceeded 8 feet. Even as water receded, thick layers of mud, oil, and debris coated every road surface. While trucks dragged debris to clear forward positions for helicopter supply drops nearby. The MK25 variant, equipped with a 9-ton self-recovery winch mounted at the front, proved critical on multiple occasions. Trucks that buried themselves in deep sediment or debris fields could self-extract or pull a disabled vehicle clear without outside assistance. Draining New Orleans took 43 days from start to finish. Throughout that entire period, ground logistics never paused. MTVR convoys continued running water, food, and personnel into sections that remained partially submerged well into October 2005. Back at Camp Shelby in Mississippi, mechanics performed deep maintenance on returning MTVRs. Contaminated drivetrains were cleaned, seals replaced, brake lines flushed of chemical floodwater residue. The trucks had worked hard, and they needed the same care they gave. The Marine Corps later documented that its vehicles maintained an operational readiness rate above 90% throughout the Katrina deployment. That figure matched what the MTVR was delivering simultaneously in Iraq and Afghanistan. Same truck, different theater. At what Katrina demonstrated was not only that the MTVR could handle flood conditions, it proved that a machine engineered for combat logistics was equally capable, with zero modification, of humanitarian disaster response on American soil. And the 60-inch fording specification had been written into the MTVR design brief for amphibious and jungle operations in the Pacific Theater. Engineers in Wisconsin did not picture New Orleans when they wrote that number. New Orleans used it anyway. An Oshkosh Defense had built the MTVR to a Marine Corps requirement, specifying 70% off-road operations. New Orleans was off-road in every sense that operationally mattered. Submerged, unmapped, unpredictable, and entirely unlike anything the procurement documents had described, as more than 22,000 active-duty military personnel and approximately 50,000 National Guard troops ultimately deployed to the Gulf Coast disaster zone. Among all the vehicles that moved relief into New Orleans, the MTVR operated where nothing else could reach. The story of Katrina is told most often through helicopters, through rooftop rescues and Coast Guard swimmers. Was the ground story belongs to the trucks, to the convoys, to drivers who held their course through 4 feet of American floodwater. The MK23 and MK25 trucks that waded through New Orleans went on to accumulate combat miles in Afghanistan, where mountain supply routes and IED threat tested them just as severely. And the trucks recognized no difference between the two deployments. Today, the MTVR continues in active service with the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy. More than 11,000 units have been produced since the first deliveries in 1999, as Katrina is part of the vehicle's operational history now, embedded in the record beside combat deployments. The 17th Street Canal has been rebuilt, the levee system reconstructed at a cost exceeding $20 billion. New Orleans has recovered, slowly, unevenly, but it has recovered, as the trucks that drove through the flood are still in service. The Oshkosh MTVR drove into a city that had become a body of water. It delivered, it extracted survivors, it kept running when nothing else could. That is the only field evaluation that matters. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these machines and the histories behind them. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from.